Kareem, how you doing?
I'm doing great today, Ryan. How are you?
Good. I'm glad you and I met. It was over a couple cocktails at a distillery over the holidays, and you and I got chatting, and it was one of those that it was difficult to pry myself away from the conversation because you got such an interesting background. And I had other people to talk to, but for our listeners that have not heard of you yet, I think maybe let's take us back to when and how you got exposed to the entrepreneurship world and dynamics, because I think you were submersed very, very deep into it from an early age. So why don't you give our listeners a little bit of the backdrop?
Yeah. So I was relatively lucky. In the 1970s, my dad started doing something that would seem crazy and harebrained. He had an idea of how to get large construction infrastructure projects financed in the third world. So he literally would jump on a plane, go to name your third world country here, and show up at the best five-star hotel of the capital and hang out. And by networking within a few days, he'd usually find somebody somewhere who had something to do or knew the Ministry of the Interior. One thing led to another, and amazingly enough, he would put together these projects where he would negotiate between international banks, large construction companies, government agencies to do the performance bonds of other countries, and just pull together a building a, a hydroelectric dam or dredging a port out of nothing where there was no project before. And watching him negotiate this as I grew up in the 1980s was just amazing. A lot of travel, a lot of different cultures, learning how to deal with not only the different national cultures but the different cultures that we bring as we nature and nurture of growing up. It was just an amazing ideal of seeing how he did this. And after he had a few successful projects, he started doing something where he was quite literally merging together different architecture engineering firms and different construction firms to do larger projects. And that's where I had my first taste of, ooh, if you merge two groups together, you can actually get more than the sum of their parts.
And you were actually involved in some of those projects too at an early age, weren't you?
Yeah, growing up, quite literally traveling, a little bit of homeschooling, a lot of apprenticeship. So I started at a drafting table at the age of 12, and by the time I was 16 and 17, was working on actual projects that were being built.
So really seeing the intricacies of a lot of the inner workings of how the companies were merging, getting the projects executed, and it's interesting from knowing some of the backdrop of your story. How did you go from construction and architecture, and then all of a sudden into digital marketing? And there's a very interesting spot that happened. You want to kind of give the listeners,
Yeah,
what phone call changed the trajectory of where you were going?
yeah. Under the hashtag, you never know where it's going to come from. I was always passionate about technology and computers growing up when the first personal PCs were coming, and I started doing what's called macro or Lisp routine programming for AutoCAD back when AutoCAD was on DOS,
Yeah.
where you typed coordinates rather than used a mouse more often than not. We were looking for ways to really make it faster and to work faster to do drafting. I wrote a few Lisp routines and they ended up being published in a magazine for CAD. One thing led to another. And my last semester in university, I received a letter asking me to go work at Autodesk,
Hmm.
at the company that made AutoCAD. And while that wasn't a good fit very long, I loved the technology. And I had a mentor and a manager who said, you know what? You'd be really good at helping regular people understand the technology the way you are. So why don't we move you from programming to marketing, and you can go work with a wish list team explaining to our clients what's going to be in the next version. So I went from architecture to a brief stint in trying to program to trying to explain technology to folks who really, didn't want to understand the depth. They just needed it to work.
And is that what happened when? So that makes a lot more sense now as I think about you're switching into the digital marketing world, and you ended up becoming an entrepreneur because you've been through multiple exits.
Mhm.
So where did you pull the trigger to actually start doing this for yourself?
Um, yeah, another sort of unforeseen circumstance. I was visiting a friend in Los Angeles who was starting an ISP, and in that ISP, they were installing racks of modems and servers and things. And I was just sort of hanging out. One day, the phone rang, and as they're back there, like, "Hey, Kareem, do us a favor, pick up the phone." So I pick up the phone, and it ended up being a very famous PR agency that I didn't realize at the time, asking if the company wrote websites. Being more of a smartass than somebody who answers questions without knowing their context, I asked who the client is before answering, and they said, "Oh, well, our client is Nissan." It's like, yeah, we build websites. I thought I was doing my friends a favor. I hang up the phone and say, "Hey guys, in a couple of days, you guys have somebody coming down to talk to you about building a website." And they look at me like I'm crazy and go, "We have no idea how to do that." This was 1994.
That's awesome.
So they're like, "Yeah, you're going to take this meeting with us." And one thing led to another, and we literally started a web shop, one of Los Angeles's first web shops, in the same space with this ISP.
That's awesome. And you're because you've as you go down that journey and the path a little bit, you've gone through how many successful exits at this point?
Um, let's see, I've gone through 5 exits, and 4 of them were successful monetarily, but all 5 of them were successful, period.
And and the purpose of your presentation or presence on the podcast, I should say, is because you've got some crazy insights on the professional services world and the inner workings of really managing people as assets, and maybe because we're not going to be going diving into all those different exits, but
Yeah.
kind of give us a little bit of the order and some of the major milestones along those, because I know you picked up some crazy bits of wisdom as you went through those, and then even from the exit that didn't work, what were some of the main trends and pieces of information that you were gathering as you were going through those?
So it's interesting because folks automatically assume when they talk about exits of service agencies that there either is no way to get out or it's going to be very complicated. And it doesn't have to be. It's true that we don't have a lot of hard assets when we talk about professional services, and let's define professional services for a second.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about professional services, we could be talking about a web shop, we could be talking about a law firm, an accountancy, anybody who is actually doing any consulting, and you're selling either hours or services as projects. It doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So folks figure that, you know what, how can I sell it if it doesn't have any assets? And when we're in the business of selling services day to day, a lot of people use the analogy of the restaurant style, the customer's always right, and it's about customer service. And I think the analogy about restaurants actually plays through. When you're talking about buying and selling restaurants, when you think about the most successful restaurants and the ones that are of the highest value,
Mm-hmm.
you're not thinking what kind of stove do they have in their kitchen, or how much did they pay for those chairs or tables.
Yep.
You're thinking, what's the reputation of that chef? What's the reputation of that restaurant? Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's huge because and there is they call it the goodwill or whatever, that is the brand, and it's the people, and it's the reputation, and it's longevity of them being in business and being consistent with what they're providing.
Right. So you hit the core of my conversation I like to have with entrepreneurs who do services. Everybody who does M&As is very familiar with the term goodwill, and you'll have a lot of technocrats in M&A say, well, goodwill is one of those things you really can't put a number on. I like to call bullshit on that.
Right, right. I would agree with that. So, where in these, exits that you've had, did you learn that the hard way? How did you come to that realization? What were some of the, big, cornerstones along the journey that really got you the passion with the statement and the opinion that you have?
Well, so what ends up happening is that you end up having a lot of people tell you that the business is only as worth as much as its contracts or as much as you have going on at the moment. And what you have to take a look at is nobody's going to buy a service company for the sort of just the financial value unless there's a motivation behind it that makes sense to the buyer. So in my experience, there's only two types of successful transactions in professional services. There's the pure financial ones. I actually worked for a large international conglomerate that buys up and swallows agencies, and they only do it based on contract value,
Okay.
period. It's just financial. You could have the best art director in the world, you could have the best clients in the world. They don't care. It's just a spreadsheet and a math position. If you're looking to just get out of your professional services firm, then it's just about filling out that spreadsheet, and a deal is a deal. On the other hand, there's an entire genre of entrepreneurs out there, like good restaurateurs, who are looking for professional services firms and are looking to expand a brand, a reputation, a service line with happy clients, because they know that by being the best of the best, they can actually charge more.
Right.
There's lots of really great family restaurants on the corners of any city, but what everybody really wants to do is they want to go to that Michelin star, that 5-star restaurant, and have that incredible meal. That's what people want, even if they can't afford it. So if you can find a way to really pull off that quality, then you have something where, you know, it's a buyer's market in the sense of coming to a final deal, but you can actually throw away the conversation of multiples and how multiples only apply to things that have intellectual property or physical value, and say, this is what my business is worth, and I've got to find the right buyer.
That is hugely powerful because people have heard me say your business is worth what someone's willing to pay for it, because there's all these financial models and all these different things, but it's really worth what it's worth to both parties, which is what you're describing. You're putting the control into, you knowing what that is. So maybe, Karim, let's take this in a couple different chunks. One being like, how do we build that type of firm to make sure that we're doing the right things to be able to get that kind of control? And then the second being, let's talk about the deal structure and how you go about actually, forgetting about the multiples and accomplishing that. And then also maybe the third being the last part of the journey, which is, what does the ongoing relationship look like once you've done something like that? So maybe starting out with the first one, what are the things that you're doing to make yourself that brand and that reputation, because you're dealing with people, man. It's like one of the hardest things of being a business owner is dealing with people. Yep. And that is the sole bread and butter of what you've been doing. Yep. So what are some of the things that you've done, and what are the things that people do to make sure that they're building that brand that they need?
Well, the first thing I'd say is the most successful brands and the most successful service agencies that I've seen, again, doesn't matter the genre, are the ones who can really pull together a customer segment and verticalize. Nobody wants to go eat at a restaurant that does all cuisines. And I keep using that analogy because it's very powerful. If you can really hone the fact that you're not only a specialist in Italian food, but you're the place to go for fresh pasta that's handmade, right? That people are like, oh, well, I got to try that, right? So if you say, you know what, with my service company, I do this and I do this one thing better than anybody else, it doesn't mean that you only have one service. It means that's what you're hanging your hat on. to attract all the other things. You can still have second, third, fourth. In my current agency, we have 21 services, but we are really well known for 3 of them. But by revenue division, those 3 bring in most of the leads. But by service offering of what actually gets signed, I'd say it's spread across about 50% of it.
I think one of the biggest, opinions, which I think obviously you would probably disagree with, and I think I would too, is that there's, or maybe a lot of people would agree with that, everybody needs to find a niche and to verticalize and, segment their customers, but they're terrified to do it, because they say, a lot of people say yes to everything. So,
right.
How do you overcome that huge hurdle in your head or in your operations?
I'd love to tell you it's just guts.
Right.
It's not just guts, it's suffering, because there are going to be times where you're going to have to say no, even though you're hungry, because the cost of opportunity of saying yes to something just because you're hungry is going to take you away from focusing on what you can do well.
How did you go about finding exactly what the segments were that you wanted to focus on? Is there certain things that you've seen people do well as you've gone through some of your businesses and working with your customers that they figure out how to actually dive in and double down on that specific thing?
Well, so I've worked with quite a few different professional service agencies, and I'll tell you, the ones that are the most successful, it's because whether it's a single leader or a leadership team, they focus on what they're naturally good at. So if you have somebody who is a really good engineer, if they lead their vertical in towards that engineering, or they're a really good artist and they lead their service towards the design, or if it's a type of law or a type of accountancy, you will see that they are very successful. And for the things they don't do well, don't even try it. Partner.
Mm-hmm.
I actually gave a talk at an event in Europe that was specifically about partnership. And you shouldn't try and do everything yourself, because you will get a lot further by trying to partner, and you will get a lot more business out of that. And that's something that not only I practice, but I try to consult with the folks that I talk to tell them that that's the best thing they should be doing.
Can you give us a couple examples of things that people try to do but they should have actually partnered with?
Well, I'll stick to digital agencies right now, or marketing agencies. You have marketing agencies right now that are trying to do everything.
Right.
They're trying to give you a brand. They're trying to tell you what your sales strategy should be. They're trying to come up with a logo. They're trying to build you a website. They want to shoot a video. They want to sell your media, and then they want to help you with the SEO. Not to mention write the content, right?
Right.
To have the depth of that expertise, you have to have thousands of employees.
Right.
Not only do you have to have thousands of employees, but the communication between the different departments so that you can communicate well with that one client has to be flawless.
Mm-hmm.
What are the chances? What are the odds, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I try to tell the folks that I work with is work towards your strengths, partner for your weaknesses. And it's something that for me personally, the minute I got over my own ego of, hey, you know what? I'm not a good writer. I need help.
True that.
Once I got over my own ego, I was like, oh, crap. So I figured out a way how to partner with a writer, and I figured out how to get my thoughts across to that writer. And, some of the articles that even lately, last week, I published an article that got some really good reviews from a community I'm a part of. And like, wow, you're a great writer. I'm like, no, I just got my ideas out and I had a writer help me.
Mm-hmm. Right. So is there as you niche in with because I think you hit on a couple of huge points there, because when you have people and you're managing people, managing projects and customer expectations,
Mm-hmm.
how does that change your internal operations when you're finding someone, and how do you manage the people of this? Because again, it's building that brand and the reputation. How do you backfill those kind of people? And is there certain systems that you use to manage those people and to get everybody thinking the same way and on that vision of the niche or the vertical? I mean, what were the certain things that you did to get everybody marching in the same direction?
I'm going to put a pin for later, come back to the clients, and how you do how the customer is always right. But
Mm-hmm.
let me answer your question right now about building that team. We both know Sherry Walling, Dr. Sherry Walling, and
Mm-hmm.
I have the pleasure of helping her out sometimes with some of the stuff that she's doing. One of the exercises she took my executive team through was the Strength Finder, and by coincidence, not, um, or by planning, it turns out that the six people who lead my agency are almost they literally fill every niche. They make a complete segment, and they don't really overlap. Um, that's important, especially if you're going to scale, which we haven't gotten to. But
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to scale past one or two people, you really have to take a look at making sure that you're using those types of qualities that come through on the strengths finder and say, okay, I'm really good at this, you're really good at that. Give each other the space to do that.
What are some of the examples? Because I think a lot of people are familiar with the strength finders and what are those different skill sets that you're filling and how do they translate into the operational or actual execution roles?
So the most prevalent that you see when it comes down to brass tacks in business is folks who are more the strategic thinkers, or sometimes they're quick starts, and people who are more operational, or they're shippers, they deliver. If you just want to break it down by simply that as a starting point, that's the beginnings of it. But that you can read about that just through the Strength Finder, to the Strength Finder stuff. It's just very important to really find a good juxtaposition. Is really the bottom line here.
Mm-hmm. So how does that actually impact your ability to scale? Because I think it's getting the right people in the right spots is a crucial thing for every business owner to actually have a machine, even if it's full of all of these people that's humming. How does that impact your ability to scale and to deliver large quantities or high volumes?
Yeah, um, you know, and that touches a little bit on, you were talking about some of my successes and failures. I learned the hard way that in a professional services firm, I have not seen a successful way to take outside money. The only way to scale fast through the 20 years of working that I did was taking external money. And by taking external money, you're sort of creating that artificial exit, that need to exit, because people need their multiples back out with a certain schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I've learned in trying to step back, I did it backwards. Most people start by bootstrapping a business, and then they come in and they get investors later. I did it backwards. I started a bunch of businesses with investors, had some good exits, and then I backed into, hey, you know what? I'm going to bootstrap this thing.
I love it.
And if you're going to bootstrap it, the number one thing I'm going to tell you is you have to be able to figure out how to scale your skills quickly. And to scale the skills quickly, it's about bringing in those people who they might not think like you do, and that might be frustrating, but that's sort of why you need them.
Can you give us an example of a dynamic like that?
Yeah, one of the guys on my current team, I'm so very proud of him. He has a military background, and he has a way of thinking through things where it's very by the numbers. What's the SOP? What's the process? How do I apply these steps? And where do we get to next? And coming into it, when I first got to know him, I would get a little bit frustrated because I'm like, I'm this guy who's always, I think of myself as a strategist. I'm always like three steps ahead, right? So I'm trying to explain step number three after saying two words of step number one. And he's like, hold on a minute, come back. and talk to me about step number 2. And I would just get frustrated. But what I learned working more and more and more with him was, first of all, bringing me back to forcing me to talk about step number 2. I had skipped a bunch of things that could potentially cause problems. Number 2, by skipping ahead to number 3, what I had done was I had not given him a moment, let him think it through. I was rushing. And I would find out later that in him taking the time to do that, he would come up with directions that I hadn't even thought of.
Mm-hmm.
So I just had to get over my impatience. And then thirdly, I would rub off on him to where he would take everything that I've done. And when somebody came to him and said, hey, I have an idea, and they're about to go through the 3 steps, some of the things that I brought to the table, he'd go, oh, yeah, no, I see where you're going to be on number 3, but let's talk about number 2 real quick. And he'd be able to apply some of the things that I brought on. And then vice versa, as I just explained to you how I see the value of him backing up to number 2, it's changed the way I think. So it's amazing the opportunity you bring by not hiring people who you know too well or are already your best friends, or, hey, I think I could spend a lot of time with this person, therefore I'm going to hire them because I like them.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've been there, done that, made the mistakes.
Yeah.
And, when you think about, a professional services firm, there's a lot of different ways. And you talked about from strategy to shipping and delivery and how you're essentially making an org chart of roles and responsibilities. How are you building this system internally of communication and delivery of the services to the client? Because I think, there's huge from the, day one that here's what we're doing. And again, whether it's digital marketing or if it's, any other professional services, but you're layering on these projects with these different people and different skill sets. Is there certain tools or systems or methodologies that you use to get everybody working together like that now that you've got all these different skill sets on the team?
Oh, we could go down a rabbit hole for an hour just on this. This is incredible. We're in a great moment in time in history right now, because for the last 80 years, it's been about get everybody in the same room and give them the culture, hand them the culture. And the smart people, even 80 years back, were saying, no, let the culture develop on its own. In the last 10 years, we've really seen the emergence of the virtual company, the distributed company, the company that isn't necessarily in one office.
Mm-hmm.
Forget satellites, but you can't have the physical water cooler time. And that's created this vacuum where you don't have a choice as an entrepreneur. If you have a virtual company or distributed company, the culture is going to be made by itself. You can try and affect it, but it's going to be an independent organism of its own. And the tools you have to use today are growing, and they're getting more complex, and those relationships are getting more complex. So it's amazing to see how this is changing today and how we have an opportunity to create companies that have very healthy cultures or unhealthy cultures, depending on how we interact with each other.
And it's a combination of the project management tools to video conferencing to help employees engage, all that kind of stuff, isn't it? And it's a mesh. It's a mesh of all that stuff and how people interact with each other.
Oh yeah, from the monthly company meetings where the managers are quite literally showing the embodiment of how calling out employees, how they embodied what our mission goals were, and what our core values were, to quite literally at our company, we have a director of operations who will take a new employee and put them on a 15-minute get to know you video call with literally a random set of people.
Oh, cool.
And you show up on a video call, you've never met this person before, and you just start talking about the fact that you both work for the same company, and oh, you live in Oregon? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, oh, that's cool. And oh, you have a vegetable garden. And you just sort of get to know each other. in a different way than it used to be bumping people in, bumping into the hall in places.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different way. It's very cool. It's very different. And if done right, it can be just as healthy, and it can be, you can still get that same dynamic of loyalty that people would only get by working in the trenches elbow to elbow.
So as you take this, I like how you called it the organism, the culture, because it grows and it kind of evolves on its own as all these people interact and are delivering, things in the same fashion to the customers that they all are seeing in the same light. How is it now as we kind of shift into the second, part of the big question of how is it that you look at that and then figure out who that could be a potential strategic partner or someone that you could sell to, because you've got this potentially distributed team, or whether it's in person or not. I mean, you got all these people and this internal culture of communication and delivery. How is it that you figure out who the best person is to sell it to? And then how do you go about valuing it? And like you said, a lot of the times there's a lot of earnouts because of the riskiness of that culture dissipating afterwards. So, I mean, I know you've got a ton of thoughts on this, but where do you start?
Where do I start with which one of those questions? I have a separate answer for each of them. Sorry.
Well, no, and I think it's good because I've got so many questions about it because I think you're debunking the norm of the challenges with this problem. So let's maybe just start out with, let's say you've got a healthy organization and you've kind of built this organism that you've talked about. How do you know where to start looking, whether it is a financial or a strategic partner?
Perfect. So let's say you have a healthy organism, and let's say you have taken a corner. You have created yourself a vertical. Well, for every vertical, there's cousin verticals. Rather than thinking to yourself, how do I expand? Think to yourself, who's already doing this and who's doing it well? And let's say you come up with 10 companies.
Mm-hmm.
Out of those companies, look up their reputation. If you have access to a client or two of theirs, if you have access to ex-employees of theirs, see what's been written on them. Never use any of those websites that are just for disgruntled employees. Try to find out a little bit about them, and then that'll cut you down to 5. Okay, once you have 5, find out who the principals are of those companies. Get on a plane, get in a car, get on a train, get on a boat, go and meet them. Meet them without an agenda. Go and talk to these people and see what kind of entrepreneurs are they. See how they're leading their company. See if you get along with them. The 3 strongest partners I have in my business today, I did not have a thought that, I was going to go find that one person, talk to that one person, and go sell them on being a partner. They were at an event. They were one of many that I was talking to because I thought of their particular niche, and there's just something clicked. They aligned with my core values. They aligned with my meaning. They aligned with the way I wanted to conduct business. That'll bring you from 5 to 1 very quickly.
And it's a lot like dating, isn't it? I mean, it's a partnership. I mean, it's literally like a partnership. That's you're finding partnerships more than just someone to write you a check to cash out. I mean, it's a very different thing.
It absolutely is. And to do it right, then baby steps, right? Whether it's dating or business, just take one step at a time, see how you get along. Nothing will really show the true colors of an organization as doing a pitch together.
Right. It's pitch to a client, right?
Yeah, you pitch to a client together, and even in the preparation for that pitch,
right.
I've started a pitch with an agency that I had all the best indications from, and we were pulling together a presentation. And halfway through pulling together slides, they pull up a slide and they're like, "Well, we want to use this slide." I'm like, "So tell me about this slide." And they started going off for 25 minutes on how horrible that client was, but they use it to get new work. It's okay to say, you know what, that wasn't the best experience. But they spent 25 minutes of my life telling me what a negative experience they had with a customer.
Yep, that says a lot.
That said everything I needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
When you're selling services, I've had to part ways with clients before. differences of opinion, but you don't go around bad mouthing them. The only thing that forgives that is if somebody doesn't pay a bill.
Right. Well, and you're selling your reputation too, which is about people and how you conduct your behavior.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I think you hit
So
on an interesting thing here, Kareem, because the partnership and you going into ventures together, I have you seen it because I have is where people want out and they're too burnt out. So that sounds like a lot of work and you're trying to get married when instead you want to go away. So I think,
right.
I probably going into this with a good mindset that you're, kind of evolving your business and your situation and it's not just going to be able to be walking away because that's not kind of the arrangement that you're looking at.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I felt the
It's in like
question.
if you're burnt out, you don't want to go down this route necessarily because of the work it's going to be to building a relationship because building a relationship takes time.
So I'm going to answer your question by quoting our common friend again, Dr. Sherry Walling, with her work at Zen Founder, and saying, if you're burnt out, deal with that first.
Right? No, I think that's huge.
Yeah, because if you're burnt out, you're not going to be able to sell your company. You have to get over that moment first because you're not going to get your value out of it.
So let's say you're not burnt out and because you couldn't say it better myself. If you're not burnt out, you're going down this route. How do you then start if you've got the synergies and you've got the magic flowing between the two organizations, how do you structure something like this to make it work for everybody and to make sure that you're getting the highest value and you're not just looking at the chairs and the assets in the restaurant
Yeah.
like you're talking about?
And that's where I've had a little bit of success in dealing with some of the acquisitions and mergers that I've seen. Is there are so many ways to do things that people just ignore because they're thinking, okay, performa wise, the company is worth this. I'm going to have this type of check, and I want this type of deposit, and I want this type of earnout, and these types of restrictions or options, and they walk into it just very black and white. The best thing somebody could do is say, you know what, this is what I'm looking for. Everything else, let's have a conversation about. Because the most successful deals that I've seen aren't necessarily just the ones that the big multinationals do. Again, whether you're talking about any type of consultancy, not just marketing, the standard, it's going to be a certain amount based on your contracts, and it's going to be a certain amount up front with a certain amount of payout or clawback or this or that or the other. Sure, you can talk about those all day long. At the end of that transaction, nobody's going to be happy. I guarantee it. It's a war of attrition. The more successful, the more successful projects are the ones where the entrepreneur who's selling is very honest with themselves about what they want, even if that's just money and nothing else, or an exit and nothing else. And they really decide what's important to them, and they go, all right, everything else besides what's really important to me, let's take a look at that. Because when you walk in and you say, here's my musts, and there's a list of 15 things, you're going to get the same thing on the other side. And that's where we talk about the beginning of negotiations, right?
Mm-hmm. What are some of the musts that you see? Everybody knows the money one, but what are, I think, like you said, most people don't know how many different variations there are behind this and how creative you can actually be on these structures. What are some of the musts that you see that people go in? And then also, what are the different kind of things that people aren't thinking of that they should be?
So I'm going to stay away from the typical cliches of the financial transaction.
Right.
I'm going to say some of the things that I've seen that are just awesome is I've seen entrepreneurs who actually wanted to build a long-term company. So they walked in with one of their musts being, I want this brand or I want this company to continue. And you dig in further and they're like, because we do good work and we have happy clients. Or you have somebody say, you know what? I've come to a point where I have to retire. One of the agencies that I actually bought at the time started out being one where they came to me with a really good one, which is a lot of professional service firms are started by people who are experts in one area. They grow and then they realize, hey, I'm a really good expert, and now I'm actually just managing business and payroll and contracts. And I want to go back to being my expert, my subject matter expert. So they would come and they'd say, I want to go back to being a department head and let somebody else run the business, right? I've reached a glass ceiling where I'm not going to have the wild success of my friend Will Reynolds that automatically did so well that he got a professional executive team that gets paid a lot of money and he can actually go do R&D all on his own. But if you hit a glass ceiling, you can say, you know what? I don't need to be the C blank O. I can actually go be a department head and be happy. Those are some of the smartest entrepreneurs I know because they can walk up to a larger firm and say, what's important to me is I want to be a subject matter expert. I want to have a certain amount of autonomy as long as it's profitable in creating this type of product or this type of service or this type of something. And people who are looking to grow professional services firms like myself will say yes to that all day long. If you're passionate about getting back to doing what you do, that's the best thing in the world, right? But then where I started the story was even in this one situation, that's where they started the conversation. And then unfortunately, this entrepreneur's health took a turn for the worst. I'd gotten to know him by now. His name was Alex King. He was one of the founders of the WordPress community, one of the first people to work on the project. Awesome individual. People looked up to him as a technologist. And after we came up with a deal where he wanted to go back and really focus on being an engineer and get out of running the day-to-day business, he was re-diagnosed with cancer.
No, no.
And he said, I've got to take a step back. I can't do this. But the most important thing to me is let's change the nature of the deal. It's no longer what's my buyout, but how do I take care of the business that I've built? How do I take care of the people that are in it? Please, let's do a deal where you're not going to do the standard M&A thing that, 3 months in, you're going to get rid of 80% of the staff.
So it's really just knowing what's important and how are you seeing, so like, let's say, how are you seeing people balance the money plus their musts? Because, I think one of the challenges that some professional services firms get into is that, they've got potentially both, whether they've really addressed the musts or not. But,
Yeah.
A lot of there's a lot of earnouts in this industry too. And so how do you balance the need for the money and the need to be reassured that you're going to be fine and not be taken advantage of who you're selling to, but then also hitting your musts?
So, on the subject of earnouts specifically, it's really important to create earnouts that you believe in. If everybody's being honest on when they're actually negotiating the earnouts and not saying, you know what, these last 3 earnouts, I'm never going to last that long anyway, so what do I care? If you're honest about it, you can come up with something that's going to work for everybody. It just has to be profitable. That's the bottom line. It's about execution at that point. But people think that it's only going to be about the money, so they don't think about negotiating the autonomy, about negotiating the what if. Okay, let's talk about an earnout where you say you have to generate $1 million worth of product by the end of the year. Okay, what happens if you don't? It can't be black and white because as part of the selling of your business, you're giving up the control of affecting the marketing budget, of affecting your hiring plan, right? So your earnouts can't be that simple. They have to be a little bit more complex. And if you take some of these things into consideration, you really can have a healthy earnout, and you can have something that has longevity to it. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who did not make it through their earnout because they wanted to keep their sanity. And a lot of it would have been salvageable on both ends if they had bothered to take the time to think about the what ifs on earnouts.
I think you hit on an amazing point here, and I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but it's about these contracts, or like all it is you're describing and planning for all of the scenarios. So earnouts have lots of bad rep, but I mean, all you're saying is that in that contract, plan all the different things that could be out, and then you're just you're writing your own narrative, aren't you?
You are, and you can't imagine any possible thing that'll happen, right? You can sit here and say, I'm going to come up with a spreadsheet with any possible eventuality that might happen. So no matter how well you plan it, there's going to be something that happens that you didn't plan for. But if you've spent the time talking about the what ifs, it'll be close enough that you'll be able to deal with it in good faith with your negotiating partner.
Well, and I think, I mean, that's the far end of the planning spectrum, where a lot of stories that we've heard on the show or other shows is that they don't ask any of the what ifs in this earnout, and they don't
Yeah.
realize that these people are not intending it. And I've heard stories where, it's tied to margin instead of top line, and all of a sudden they really, right, you're laughing because all of a sudden you're like, oh sure, yeah, we've always had 20% profitability. And I literally heard this story where, all of a sudden a big capital expenditure of a new truck gets thrown in, at the end of Q2, and they don't get their huge bonus. And they're like, oh,
Yep.
wait a second, I was not in charge of
Yep.
margin. And then there's this huge
Yep.
dispute.
A few years back, I gave a talk at a European conference as well, another one, where I started the talk for the first 15 minutes telling 3 stories of how, when I worked for the multinational, I screwed 3 different entrepreneurs out of their businesses because they were so full of themselves, they weren't thinking through these processes. And that's exactly right. You have somebody who walks up to the table and goes, I'm worth this blank multiple because I always have 20% margin. Like, okay, so let's write that down. You're going to get your earnout and your extra 100% bonus as long as you hit that 20%. What they didn't negotiate was quite literally a cap on capital expenditures, or the capital expenditures being deducted from that, or any number of things that the business can choose to screw you on later. It happens all the time, all the time.
Right. And I think, it really has, and that kind of goes into like the third kind of category that we were talking about, which, because there's an earnout, you're kind of switching into the life with the next business partner. And how is it that, what are some of the things that business owners can do that you've experienced or that you would give advice to on how to figure out what your musts are?
Mm. Obviously, we have to get past money, right? The first must is always going to be some level of money, whatever that is. If you can get past that, you really have to ask yourself what you want to do next, because it is an exit, right? One of the things that you and I have talked about at length is folks need to decide to exit for the right reasons. And if just a check is that reason, you have to be upfront about that, because then it is going to be a little bit more transactional. If your other reason is, I dealt with a company recently where the 3 partners who owned the company really wanted to join a larger entity where they could learn from. They're relatively young and relatively new to the entrepreneurial circle. So they said, if we're going to join this mega corporation, we want the opportunity to learn from people who have a better experience than we do, or a longer experience than we do. That's actually valuable to me in doing this deal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important, right?
Oh my gosh.
Because they're like, I'm going to have 3 years where I have to do an earnout. What am I going to get besides a check?
Mm-hmm.
Invaluable business experience.
What are the rough ratios you see between like the length of earnouts and how much is upfront versus over time? Because I think that, just to give some people a little bit of perspective and knowing how important it is to partner up with that person, that they do have these musts that are getting taken care of.
Yeah. So don't ever be in a rush, but I'll tell you some of the successful deals that I've seen. Some of them had 0 money up front. It was all on earnout or all performance based, and that's because you had a selling entrepreneur who was so convinced of their value and so convinced of their elbow grease that they could actually apply work to, that they could continue to make a difference if they found the right buyer who would let them have that autonomy and trust them back. So that way you've created a situation where you are dependent on each other for hard work and trust. Now there's all sorts of little ways to make sure that you're not letting the other person fall on their laurels, but there's all sorts of ways to create a deal where it's not just about the money up front. You can actually get more than you ever imagined money wise by creating a deal that is backloaded. People always assume it's about that deposit check.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the ways that you can maybe expand on the backloaded and the different ways that people have actually realized that value?
Yeah. So the sort of the question I ask folks when they want to talk about this is, okay, great. You want $1 million check up front. I'm just picking a number out of thin air. You want $1 million check up front. Awesome. What are you going to do with your business then? If forget selling the business, if I just gave you that $1 million to put into your business to make your business more successful, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, at the end, let's say you spend that money, it came out well. How much more is your business worth now? 5x, 6x, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now it's worth more than that $1 million check that was going to go into your pocket. If you're that convinced on your business that you feel like you could do more, you're not trying to exit necessarily just yet, but you feel you could do more. As a professional service company or a consultancy, don't look for external money. Look for somebody who wants to come in with you. And instead of taking that $1 million to exit, take that $1 million and build a business that's worth 5, 6, 7x much more quickly. That's how you scale a professional service agency. And you come up with a contract that says on the back end, 36 months from now, 48 months from now, if we hit these goals and these things happen, then this is the type of payout I'm going to see.
That's beautiful.
It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's the umbrella overview.
Well, I think it's huge because, there's some main things that that I've really honed in on, which is making sure that you're still loving the business. You've still got them. You understand your musts and you understand your partner to be able to leverage each other's skill sets because you're leveraging each other. I mean, it's just like that team you were talking about for your executive team with the strength finders, but you're doing it with other businesses.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know what? You find some of those businesses you never really have to merge. There was a situation where I did business with another business for close to 5 years, and every time we saw each other, we talked about, hey, someday we should merge. Hey, someday we should do this, and we just didn't. But we kept continually making each other money.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think it's fantastic because the challenge of people and skill sets is everybody's got different skill sets, and you have to be able to find a cohesive team that leverages each other's, which you and I have talked plenty about. So as we're kind of wrapping up here, Kareem, with all the different exposure you've had in the professional services and all the things we've talked about, is there, going back, is there one thing you want to highlight to make sure that it's got some light shown on it, or is there something that you want to make sure that we haven't, that you want to leave our listeners with?
I do. If you're talking about professional services, that old adage from the restaurants about the customer always being right, you have to lead with that. We all have customers who we wish would act in a little bit different way, but if you can't provide the best service with a smile on your face, no matter what, and every decision the organization makes isn't for the best outcome towards your client, get out of professional services. It's 100% on delivery and reputation.
Yeah, well said. Because it's all about what are they going to talk about after you leave.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
What is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Please come by and see either my site at marucchi.com, which I'm sure will be in the show notes, and or take a look at crabfavorite.com, the agency.
I loved it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Kareem.
Thank you, Ryan. It was a pleasure.